Greetings everyone, my name is Mark Harvey from the Western Australian Museum, and I'm really grateful to be able to contribute to this evening's entertainment.
I'm Dr Nic Dunlop. I'm a Citizen Science Program Coordinator with the Conservation Council of WA, a program that pretty much got started at about the same time as Charles Darwin Reserve.
Good evening. I'm Charlie. I think I've met a few of you in very pleasant circumstances a couple of years ago. I know Chris likes events like this to be a little bit formal, so I've dressed up properly for the occasion and put my best bush heritage hat on. And of course, an old bloke can't go out in the bush without his safari suit.
I first was invited to Charles Darwin Reserve by Hugh Pringle in 2006. Not long after the big bushfire and the purchase of the property. At that time, we were also just setting up the Citizen Science program at Conservation Council. And one of the things that we identified as being something that we could make a contribution to was looking at how selected plant and animal populations were actually responding to predicted climate change. Charles Darwin emerged as a useful laboratory for that because it sits on a very important major biogeographical boundary between the arid zone, the arid shrublands, and the southwest region, botanical province of Western Australia, with about 2/3 of its vegetation, the southern 2/3, being wheat belt vegetation that had miraculously escaped the clearing bore and the plough. And then the northern third was arid shrublands. And you can actually see the change across that mulga eucalypt line within about a kilometre of track. It's quite remarkable how the two bioregions switch over very rapidly in that area. The reason for choosing those sorts of places to look at changes in animal populations responding to climate change, mainly animal populations, is that you have habitats from both bioregions interspersed with each other on the boundary, and you have populations that belong to one or other of the bioregions in close proximity. So as the climate boundaries shift, you would expect to see some of those changes occurring there earlier, perhaps, than at other times and other places.
My first memories of the area were back in the 1990s, when I went through that area with Dr Barbara Main, who passed away a couple of years ago. We were looking for threatened species of trapdoor spiders. We went on to Whitewell Station, and I remember leaving Whitewell Station thinking that it was the most clapped out piece of god-awful sheep country I'd seen for a long time. Really disappointing. A lot of the vegetation had been trampled, the soil had been disturbed by the sheep underneath all the vegetation, and our chances of finding trapdoor spider burrows were going to be extremely thin on the ground. So we left, we didn't go back. So I then, years later, participating in the first Bush Blitz expedition that was organised by the Commonwealth and the Western Australian Museum and the Western Australian Herbarium. I visited there in 2009 and was very fortunate enough to be able to spend a couple of weeks up there, having a really good look around, meeting a bunch of new people, doing some wonderful surveys, finding some great landscapes. And of course, the most amazing person that I met was Chris, this tall, gangly man in a three-piece tweed suit. I wasn't going to say hamming it up for the media, but just being an absolute natural in front of the camera. Loved it. He was able to find all of these wonderful settings on tops of rocks and sunsets behind him. I mean, what could go wrong? It was just fantastic. But Chris has also become I think a pretty close friend since then. We don't see each other very often. We're on opposite sides of the country. But it was a great introduction to the place. We found a number of new species on that Bush Blitz trip, and I was very lucky to be able to find a new species of pseudoscorpion, which we eventually named Syncephoronus Christopher Darwini. It was found on some of the granite outcrops on the reserve.
You know, you have to have a good reason to put a lot of money into a property for conservation purposes, and you've got absolutely the best reasons at Charles Darwin Reserve, because it's in the southwest botanical hotspot. Apart from the forests, all the woodlands are pretty well cleared for wheat and sheep farming and so on, and so there are only these remnants left. And Charles Darwin Reserve is part of the biggest patch of remnants, with Mount Gibson, bits of Ningen, and the station next door, and the big block of vacant Crown land south of Charles Darwin, and it's a most significant piece because it's on the boundary, on the Mulga eucalypt line between the southwest, the overcleared southwest botanical province, and the arid zone, the arid regions, the Mulga dominated arid regions. And so it becomes a very important sort of transitional area, particularly if we've got climate change. And of course, we've got, Nic Dunlop doing all the climate change monitoring with the animals and so on up there. So it's a really, really important buffer. And it's big enough, for that area altogether is probably big enough to sort of support some continuing evolution and adaptation. Because another really important element of Charles Darwin Reserve is its place in part of the Biedermeier culture and country, and like the Mulga eucalypt line, it is on the edge of Biedermeier, Noongar, the Weedy people to the west, and so on. So it's all that area is a sort of centre where people used to congregate over parts of Mount Gibson and Ningen nearby. So it's part of the sort of core cultural overlap in the region. Early in the piece, after purchase, I did some scouting around with an archaeologist, and visited a few sites and so on, made a few notes, and then the managers of the day, Lee and Jackie Wisson, invited the Biedermeier elders down from Mount Magnet to come and have a look at the place and advise on how we should be managing it in order to maintain its cultural values, etc. And the old bloke, he's unfortunately gone now. The old bloke said when he was sort of wrapping up at the end of it, he said, "Well, I never thought this day would come where we would be invited back onto a station, because we were always chased off with a shotgun, and it's wonderful that you're going to look after it, and the main thing you have to do is clean out the rock holes, the gubby, to keep them going, because they're the source of life for the area."
One of the original reasons for that property was because it had contiguous representative vegetation of what used to be much of the West Australian wheat belt. And within that, the York gum woodlands is one habitat type that's almost been completely eliminated from the wheat belt, and it doesn't occur really in the Great Western Woodlands, unlike salmon gum woodland or gimlet and those sorts of things. So it's actually very, very important for the protection of that particular ecosystem. And that's becoming more important because some of our volunteers have done a lot of work on the structure and evolution, if you like, of that particular vegetation type, the York gum woodlands. There's some very clever people in the volunteers that Bush Heritage have got working on Charles Darwin, and basically they've developed models of what a natural York gum woodland looks like. And we, in the context of what we monitor in climate change, we've also latterly switched over much more to using bird communities and other groups, simply because of issues with being able to collect enough data to do statistical analysis and that sort of thing. So we have actually been profiling what the bird communities of those habitats are like. Now, it's become quite important now because in our region around CDR on the other side of the lakes in the wheat belt, there's a major carbon sink developing where they're using the local York gum subspecies to sequester carbon on the old York gum pink soils. And they are trying to, obviously, hoping that they're developing forests or woodlands that will stand the test of time, that will eventually transform and resemble something that looks like natural York gum woodland, and as well as sequestering carbon in the trees, that there will also be biodiversity co-benefits, to use the current jargon. So the only place we can go and look at what a real contiguous York gum woodland looks like is Charles Darwin and the other stations in the immediate surrounds. So we're now using that data as reference data to inform the process of carbon sequestration in the Yarra Yarra catchment, which is just on the other side of the lakes to where Charles Darwin is.
For me, the fascinating place about the reserve is that it's at that interzone between the rangelands and the woodlands. So you get a broad range of different habitat types. There's acacia woodlands, there are some heathlands, there's some salt flats. There's the woodlands, which I particularly like. They're particularly diverse. And there's also those granite domes where the pseudoscorpion and other things occurred. So to me, it's sitting at that wonderful intersection between two really important ecosystems in Western Australia. And to see the transformation once the sheep had been taken off and the property had been destocked by Bush Heritage, to see that transformation from a clapped out piece of sheep country that I didn't want to have anything to do with, to me plotting ways that I can get back up there at every opportunity, is why it's so fascinating.
I suppose the most amusing time was the time when we were up with Chris with 60 Minutes, and the project manager there, the program manager, decided that they had to do something with Chris that involved climbing. So we ended up with a scenario where we had Chris and Liz Hayes from 60 Minutes hoisted up a tree, salmon gum notionally peering into a cockatoo hollow, and then two more members of the team dangling also from the same tree in order to provide counterweights so they didn't move. And Chris up the tree wearing a full suit except for bare feet. So I don't know if anyone came across that, they could ever imagine what in blazes was going on.
When I was researching the history of that area and of Charles Darwin Reserve and Whitewell Station, I met up with Vaughan Lane, who's a Bartermeyer man from that area, and then subsequently Vaughan turned up in the area because he was training young folk to be, land rangers, and he was at Charles Darwin Reserve. So we went out. I said, look, there's a rock hole or two, a garbida, that I want to show you, because he was interested in them and wanted to know where they were. So we went and cleaned out the one next to the just down the south track from the homestead, a couple of kilometres down, on the big piece of granite there. and it took some cleaning out, because the pastoralists in those days used to, because they used to muster by trapping rather than, because you couldn't get horses or vehicles or motorbikes around the country. They used to fill in the rock holes with rubble and rocks and dirt and everything, so they didn't hold water. So the sheep would have to go to the troughs where they could be trapped. So we dug all this stuff out and spruced it up all nice and clean, and it looked like rain. This is summer. It looked like a thunderstorm coming, and Vaughan had to go, but he was desperate. He was desperate to actually see it filled. Well, sort of half an hour after Vaughan had left, down it came, about half an inch of rain. I rushed out there, and there it was full up and overflowing. There was water everywhere. So I sent him the photos. He was very happy, but very, very, very sad. But he had a cultural take on that we'd done the right thing. We'd cleaned it out. So so the spirits rewarded us with filling it up for us.
One of my favourite memories was actually being present at a patron's launch, a patron's function up at Charles Darwin Reserve, and bringing out a photograph of the new species of pseudoscorpion, which I was able to present to Chris. Not many people have shown the emotion when I've described new species for them that Chris showed, but I obviously got to him in a seriously big way. I've had people cry in front of me for all sorts of other reasons, but not so much that one. The next time I went up there was 2011. I think that might have been the patrons trip. And during that time in 2009, Chris has helped me collect that pseudoscorpion and finding one under rock going, "Eureka, I have one," or something to that effect. So Mr. Enthusiasm, which I love.
That's enough from me. Get back to work, enjoy your dinner, and keep up the good work.
Have a wonderful evening. It's been lovely to talk to you, and I'll chat with you shortly. Bye-bye.